Greg Laurie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Andrew, good to be here.
Now, Greg, you've been doing this for, several decades now. We can say that officially. Yeah. Of course, just completed the 21st annual Harvest Crusade. Something different and something rather special. Tell us about what happened.
Well, Harvest Crusades are evangelistic events, sort of done in the style of a Billy Graham crusade, hence the word crusade. I know it's sort of a charged word. Some people don't appreciate it. It's more of an in-house term we use. We'll often just call the events harvest, But it is in the style of what Billy has done around the world, which is an event that is designed for what we call proclamation evangelism. We utilize the best Christian music, the latest media, great design and graphics and visuals and all the rest of it. But we recognize that the power in reaching a non-believer is in the gospel being proclaimed. That's what the Bible says. So we believe that the whole event should build toward that presentation. It's not really about the preacher per se. It's really about the preaching. So that's what a Harvest Crusade is. So we're thankful people keep coming out. This last weekend we had over 100,000 people. And on Sunday night we had to turn people away, which it's always nice to fill a place. I don't like to turn people away, however. Yep. But it seemed to really resonate this year. And the gospel is always fresh, it's always new, it's always relevant, it's never out of date. And I'm sorry.
No, there was something specific and something special about this last weekend, though.
Yeah.
Something where you were sharing of your own pain and talking about having faith in situations where God doesn't make sense, where there is pain, where there is tragedy, but there's also robust faith. Tell us how that came together and what the response was.
I like that phrase, robust faith, well said. Well, the last time I was in New Zealand, I was in Wellington holding a crusade, and my family was with me, including my son Christopher. That was 2007. And in 2008, my son was killed in an auto accident. And this is just something you never plan for or even think about. You know that parents will die, that you one day will die, but you never think your children will precede you. And even though as a pastor I've ministered to many, many families who've lost loved ones, including children, somehow I thought this won't happen to me. It just couldn't. In fact, when I would visit people who had children die, I would do the best I could to minister to them and share appropriate scriptures and be as compassionate as I could be. And I felt like I'd been as close to it as a person could get being a pastor, because you get right in the middle of it. But I now realize I wasn't even close, and I had no idea what people were experiencing, having been on the other side, and I am on the other side. And there were times when I'd walk away from a family after ministering to them about their child, and I would actually say, you know what, if that ever happened to me, I don't know if I could handle it. And when I heard the news, Andrew, I didn't know if I could handle it. It was so devastating that if words could kill you, I felt like I could have died on the spot. You just felt like physically you could have a heart attack. It was so earth-shattering. It's like all the air was sucked out of the room and time stood still, and I heard those words and it was like, this can't be happening, but it was happening, and it did happen. So I haven't been back to New Zealand since then. So as I'm just here in town, I'm just having a lot of memories. It's hard. Memories are great because they remind you of fun times, but there's a pain and loss. Well, out of this grew my desire to help other people who are hurting. Because I want to say that though it was the hardest moment of my life, though it was devastating, God was there. And you know what, Andrew? If God wasn't there, I would have stopped preaching. I wouldn't have given my faith up, but I would have stopped preaching, because I'd have thought, why do I want to tell people this if it's not true? But he was there, and he is here, and he is with me each day, helping me through it. So I feel like, I want to help people. And a lot of people have sought me out since this who've lost children, telling me their stories and asking me for encouraging words. And so out of it's come a couple things. I wrote a little book called Hope for Hurting Hearts that was very honest. I tried to not candy coat anything. I just wanted to be as real as I could be. But also out of it came what we call an evening of hope. And that's what you're referring to. On Sunday night at Angel Stadium in Southern California, we had Stephen Curtis Chapman, who also in 2008 had his daughter killed in a tragic accident. Our son went to be with the Lord only 2 months after his daughter Maria Sue. We also had Mercy Me, and everyone's probably heard their song, I Can Only Imagine, which is about heaven. And it was written by the lead singer, Bart, in the aftermath of his father's untimely death when he was a boy in high school. And finally, we had Dr. James Dobson. And he called me after this happened, spent well over an hour with us on the phone. And, you know, he's everything in private that you think of him as in person. He's the same guy, just that compassionate, caring man. And so we wanted to take these things and share them with others, and it really resonated. A lot of people came, and not only did we have 47,000 people come to the stadium, but we saw some 4,500 people make professions of faith to follow Jesus Christ. So this has only made me more fervent in what you described as a robust faith and wanting to bring the gospel to as many people as possible. And frankly, that's why I'm here in New Zealand only days after that crusade.
Does it make any more sense, the death of your son Christopher, given how many people have responded to it? Is the pain of that tragedy any less sharp, having seen how many people have been blessed and encouraged by you sharing your grief?
It's an interesting question. It's not an easy one to answer. Does it make more sense? Honest answer, no. I'd like to say, oh, yes. A, B, C, D, and E has happened, therefore, yes, no. Because, you know, here's the truth. When a child dies, no matter what good things come out of it, nothing makes you feel like the trade was worth it because it was such a big trade. You would give your life in the place of your child any day of the week. You know, when David's son died, David in the Bible, he said, I wish it had been me rather than him. And his boy who had died, Absalom, was a wicked boy. But, you know, this is just the natural response of a father. So making sense is something in some ways I've kind of given up on, trying to make it make sense. I don't think there always has to be cause and effect. I know we love to quote Romans 8:28 as Christians, all things are working together to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. But that doesn't mean that everything is going to have a tidy little response to it. Like bad thing, out of it comes good thing. Now, there are things in life that work that way, and quite many things, in fact, many things that are quite surprising. You'll say, that was horrible, and it turns out to be wonderful. But then there are things that happen in life that are just bad. The Bible doesn't say God makes necessarily bad things good. He says he causes all things to work together for good. So here's a bad thing. But out of a bad thing, good things can come. For instance, there can be an earthquake tomorrow in some part of the world, and thousands of people die. Okay, that's a very bad thing. Nothing will make that a good thing. But through relief efforts, most likely led by Christian organizations, lives that are touched, that's a good thing. It's good despite the bad, you see. And so that's what you see that a lot of. And I've seen that, oh my goodness, huge amounts of people coming to faith, telling me that the story of my son brought them to Christ, brought them back to Christ. So in those things I rejoice. But as far as saying, yes, now it all makes sense to me, no, I don't think it will make sense till I get to heaven. And I'm sure when I get there, it will make sense. And I'm confident of that. But I think, you know, if God were to answer all of our questions, it'd just blow our minds. I mean, we ask God, why? What if God just said, okay, I'm going to tell you? We'd probably say, well, I don't agree with that. You know, but when we get to heaven and we see things as we need to see them, I think that we'll be willing to accept them as well.
You've been holding harvest events, as I said before, for several decades now.
Yeah.
The way in which those events are held, the way in which people respond to them, has that changed over that period of time?
I would say the response is grown. They're much larger than when they started. I would say we've grown and we've learned a lot through trial and error. Technology's exploded since then. I mean, when we first started doing our crusades, we were fooling around with some new technology called webcasting, where you could actually watch it on a computer. In fact, someone sent me a picture of a group of people in Africa gathered around a little laptop computer running off a generator. And a number of them came to faith, but the movements were all jerky. This is back in the days of 56K modems. And now, I mean, if people go to harvest.org and look at our website and watch the crusade, it's shot in HD. It's so crisp. It looks like TV almost at this point. So we've embraced new technology. We've tried to stay current. but at the same time, the essential mission of the event has remained the same, which is there needs to be that moment in the evening where the gospel is proclaimed.
Now, the message hasn't changed. The technology certainly has. I suppose the essence is, has the harvest field changed? Has the way in which people responded? Are people responding to the gospel differently or responding to different messages or in different ways than they were perhaps 20 years ago?
That's interesting. I would say yes and no. I would say here's the difference. People are more biblically illiterate today than they were 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, it was ridiculous. Now, I can't speak for New Zealand so much, but in the United States, the biblically illiteracy rate is off the charts. And by that I mean, there was a time when you could assume when you preach, I've been preaching for over 35 years, that when you mention Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark and stories like this, that, oh, sure, I know that. But see, the Bible isn't even taught as literature any longer. People don't even have points of reference any longer. I don't think I can assume when I speak that people have a clue as to what I mean. When I even talk about Jesus dying on the cross, I think everything has to be broken down and spelled out very clearly in the days in which we're living. We're moving, we're beyond a post-Christian culture in America. We're moving rapidly toward, the weird thing is it's not like we're atheistic. Most Americans believe in God. The problem is we believe in anything and everything. We'll embrace it all. And so that's one of the big differences. But I always find that certain themes resonate with people. And I've been preaching on the same themes for years. I always talk about the shortness of human life. I've always talked about heaven. I've always talked about the soonness of the Lord's return. And I always try to deal with things people are grappling with in the moment. I've always spoken to young people and the struggles they're facing. And now with the passing of time, these young people write me letters, and they're adults and they have their own children, and they're bringing their children to our crusades, and they're coming to Christ. And so, but I love the fact that the Word of God continues to connect. I think sometimes people feel, well, we need to make the Bible relevant. Well, I don't believe that. I believe the Bible is relevant. I think there's a big difference between a man or a woman that feels they have to make it relevant and a person who believes it is relevant. When I walk into the pulpit, I know my message is true. I know I'm right. That may sound arrogant, but I know what I'm saying is right as I proclaim God's truth, and I have confidence in my message. So I don't think my job is so much to make the Bible relevant as much as it is to let the lion out of the cage with confidence. Not with arrogance, with humility, but with confidence in my message. In fact, when I speak, I'll often use self-deprecating humor. I'll make jokes about myself because I think, pompous preachers turn people off. And, and the moment I say I'm not a pompous preacher, I guess that's the, that would be the ultimate illustration of being pompous. But I try not to take myself too seriously, but I do take my message very seriously.
The longevity of your ministry in itself is a testimony to God's effectiveness in working through it, and that you have second generations of people that are coming back to hear the message again is, well, a wonderful endorsement in itself. How do you do the follow-up? How do you go from, here's the point that we make a decision to commit our lives to Jesus, to discipleship, to moving from the milk to the meat and saying, let's build robust followers of Jesus Christ, rather than just, okay, I'm in, I got my ticket to heaven?
Yeah. Valid question. And it's something I think about a lot. Understand, Andrew, that I'm not only an evangelist, I'm a pastor. Most evangelists are just guys who travel around and hold events. When I'm not doing this, I'm at home pastoring a church, overseeing a flock and teaching the Word of God. So I care very much about follow-up and follow-through. And my desire is not to just see people come forward, but to go forward spiritually. So I believe that our follow-up program is so extensive, and if we did anything more, it would be intrusive. It starts with, okay, when they come forward on the field, I lead them in a prayer. We have trained counselors that they meet. The counselor gives them what we call the Start Bible. This is a Bible that has just been published. We'll have them when we come here to New Zealand, but it's really designed to take the new believer by the hand to the basics of what it means to be a Christian, starting with explaining what salvation really is, taking them through secrets of spiritual growth, the basics of the Christian life, and so forth. So we give them that. Then we get their name, and we make contact with them within 24 hours and encourage them in this decision they've made. They get a letter from me or an email if they gave us their email address, encouraging them within a week or so after that. But most importantly, their name is given to a local church that has gone through a training program, and they have new believer classes taking place. And then those classes, the point person from that church, whoever that might be, ranging from the pastor to someone who's doing it for the pastor, will contact them and invite them to the classes. You know, over the last 20 years in our crusades, we've seen a lot of professions of faith, approaching 400,000. Now, those are not all conversions, but many of them are. Mm-hmm. Not only are many of them conversions, but I'm hearing story after story after story these days of people that have come to the Lord in these events and have gone on into ministry. I just got an email the other day from a guy. He was a member of one of the street gangs in Los Angeles, suicidal. His life was messed up. He said, if I didn't make that commitment to Christ then, I probably would be dead or in prison. But now this guy is in full-time ministry, has traveled the world sharing his personal story, how he came to Christ. And I've heard so many stories like that, it's mind-blowing. So, look, my job is not to save people. That's God's job. My job, really our job as Christians, is to get the gospel out to as many people as possible, as accurately as possible, and as lovingly as possible, and to leave the results in the hands of God. Yes, we want to have follow-up programs, do all that we can, but ultimately conversion is a work of the Spirit.
Certainly. Now, we were talking before about 20 years ago, and certainly the things you're describing with the beginning of the internet and the new technology there. Let's go back another 20 years before that to the California where you became a Christian, the hippie movement. Yeah. That type of thing. There was, in some ways, there was an exciting freshness of that period of time where this was what was going to change the world. This was transformational, and that was something which, well, you were caught up in as a new believer. Tell us a bit about that period of time.
Well, speaking of 20 years, that reminds me of a line from a Beatles song. It was 20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. And back in those days, in the 60s, with albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and bands like The Doors and you know, Jimi Hendrix and others, Janis Joplin. You know, the 60s counterculture, we thought we were going to change the world. And I was part of that generation, though I was on the young side. And we're going to do it basically through drugs, sex, and rock and roll. It was so stupid. But, you know, we're kids. And misguided kids at that. And I very quickly realized the emptiness of the whole drug culture, the whole hippie thing of peace and brotherhood was a facade. It was a sham. It wasn't real. But what I did see at that time was I came into contact with what we very unaffectionately called Jesus freaks. These are people that, you know, believed in God, walked around carrying Bibles, talked about Jesus, and we all thought they were collectively nuts. But I went to one of their meetings. Interestingly, I wasn't invited by anyone. I just randomly came across it. Actually, to be honest, it was because I had met a girl a few days earlier that caught my eye, and I noticed she was at that meeting, so I kind of wanted to see what she was into. I can guarantee the last thing I intended on doing that day was being converted. But as I heard the gospel, as I sat there and watched the Christians, and I stopped looking at her and I started looking around at the rest of them, I began wondering, what if this is true? You know, the thing we have to realize is even atheists have moments of doubt. And I wasn't an atheist, but I knew what I was living for was not the answer, but I didn't know what the answer was. For me, it was like process of elimination. Okay, it's not in this, this, or this. Could it be here? Could this be the answer? Well, I heard the gospel presented in an understandable way, and I made a commitment to Christ, and that was during what is now known as the Jesus movement. And that just happened right in the middle of the whole hippie movement. And it was amazing. It was a great time, I have to say. People were coming to Christ left and right, amazing stories. Really, it was out of that movement that contemporary Christian music, as we know it today, started. It was out of that movement that contemporary praise and worship started. And the effect on the church today globally is dramatic, and really a lot of it is rooted in what happened in the Jesus movement. So it was a great time, you know, and sometimes people want to sort of live in those old days, and I've never been one to live in the past. I mean, I'm barely in the present. I'm always thinking about the future, and I'm thinking about reaching the next generation, but it was a great time, no question. I actually wrote a book, not to promote my own book, but I wrote an autobiography called Lost Boy that tells my story, and I have a couple of chapters on what happened in the Jesus movement as well.
Well, let's push forward to the future. What do you see to be your legacy? There will become a time where perhaps you'll be passing on the baton, hanging up the microphone, as it were, whatever time in the future that is. I mean, you don't officially retire as a Christian minister, no. But let's project 20 years into the future. Right. How do you see Harvest Ministries in 20 years? What would you like to be the impact of that ministry?
Well, you know, no one's ever asked me that question. That's a good question. Okay, well, I'm 57 now, so I'd be 77. Well, I would hope that, let me offer as a model Billy Graham. You know, it's been my privilege to get to know Billy over the years. I serve in his board of directors. And when he was 77, he was still preaching quite effectively, I might add. In fact, he was even pushing the envelope in some areas with youth nights that he was doing that were over the top with some of the music. And I thought it was so cool because Billy would just come out, you know, all these bands and all these young kids. Billy would come out in a suit, you know. He wasn't trying to be hip. He wasn't trying to relate. He just came out and he was just Billy, and the kids loved it. I think that, you know, when you look at young people today, I think the most uncool thing you can do is try too hard to be cool. You know, oh, I'm trying to relate, and nothing's more pathetic than an older person acting like they're a younger person. So I don't try to act like I'm 18. I am what I am. You know, maybe to some of those kids at this point, I'm a father figure. In time, I'll be a grandfather figure. Well, that's okay. I just want to be doing what I can as effectively as I can for as long as I can. And, you know, at this point in my life, I think a little more about finishing well. I think when you start out, you're thinking about, you know, making your mark on the world. Well, now I'm thinking about, you know, not messing up what I've started and hearing the Lord say to me in that final day, well done, good and faithful servant. You know, you want a great example of a guy who's finished well, Billy Graham, as I mentioned. So I suppose that I would want to be preaching still, but at the same time, Andrew, I've been spending more and more time with younger men that I believe have this gifting to preach, and I've been mentoring them. And they come to my crusades, and I use them for pre-crusade events, and I use them in other ways. So I'm not only just thinking about how long can I preach, but how can I pass the baton on, as it were, to the next generation so they can reach their generation? Because that's what this is all about.
Greg Laurie, thank you so much for joining us. We very much appreciate your ministry, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Andrew.